I'm Russell Waldner from Carbon Power and Light in Saratoga, Wyoming. Welcome to Along Those Lines.
This month's podcast is brought to you by the reimagined RE magazine. New design, new logo, new editorial sections, same award-winning co-op-focused content. Visit cooperative.com/RE magazine to see for yourself.
Hi, everyone. This is a podcast about electric cooperatives, the work they do, and the challenges they face. I'm your host, Scott Hoffman. Over the past 10 to 15 years, the electric industry has moved dramatically in the direction of renewable generation, primarily wind and solar. Solar has enjoyed particularly widespread success, with sustained state and federal incentives for building photovoltaic generation, as well as skyrocketing consumer demand, and a precipitous drop in the cost of solar components, driving penetration from near zero in 2007 to almost 100 gigawatts of installed capacity today. That includes a broad mix of residential, community, and utility-scale installations. Wind power has enjoyed similar adoption, with some 122 gigawatts in current national installed capacity, but nearly all of that is at utility scale, while adoption at the local and residential level, also known as distributed generation, has been less robust. Now, the industry and the federal government are hoping to broaden the adoption of wind as a distributed generation resource, and a new program from the Department of Energy called RADWIND, or Rural Area Distributed Wind Integration Network Development, is enlisting the reach and expertise of electric cooperatives. Here to tell us about this ambitious project are Michael Leitman, he's the System Optimization Director and the RADWIND Project Manager at NRECA, and Aaron Ruschy, he's the Vice President of Operations and Engineering at Iowa Lakes Electric Cooperative, which has an ambitious distributed wind facility and is one of the RADWIND co-op partners. Aaron, Michael, thanks so much for being on the podcast.
Thank you.
Thank you for having us, Scott.
All right, so Michael, start us off here. Tell us, what is RADWIND? When did it start? Who were kind of the players involved, and what are its goals?
RADWIND really kind of goes back to an October 2018 workshop for DOE's WIRED program. Everyone loves acronyms. The Wind Integration for Rural Economic Development program. And they had researchers from across the labs. There's some representatives from NRECA, co-op representatives, really talking about looking at wind as a distributed resource. And there's a lot of potential DOE feels on rural grids. But how do we make this a more attractive resource for co-ops, provide resources? This really built on, they were interested in the Sunday project that at that point was just wrapping up, focused on co-op deployment of small utility scale solar. So fast forward, 2019, went through an application process, found out into 2019, beginning of 2020, that we'd been preliminarily approved pending final negotiations. Then COVID hit, delayed things, so we really didn't get up and running until the beginning of August. The goals of the project really are to really take a good look at wind as a distributed resource. You know, wind has really grown, but mainly in the large transmission tied space. Everyone sees these giant wind farms, but what about in the smaller distribution side space, which we've seen a lot on the solar side of growth, both in co-ops and other utilities. So we, through our research, identified over 30 co-ops, some distribution, some G&T, as well as some public power district members who have deployed around 130, 160 megawatts of projects all told. So it's a fairly small part of the co-op wind portfolio, but still significant. So unlike Sunday, which sought to develop some projects, we said, well, let's get our arms around what co-ops have already done in this space. Figure out what are the challenges, what are the experiences, lessons learned, and then use that to provide resources just like Sunday did to help co-ops that want to pursue new projects.
And Michael, I know you're working with other groups outside of co-ops. Who else are you partnering with?
We have project partners for RADWIND. That includes the Pacific Northwest National Laboratory, kind of the experts on the overall big picture of wind and distributed wind deployment, small wind deployment. We have Haas Consulting, an engineering consulting firm, which has helped develop a lot of distributed wind projects, including other types of distributed generation, telecoms. So they're kind of our technical experts, if you will. And then we have Mana Group, which is led by the former head of the Distributed Wind Energy Association. So that's the project team.
That's great. Before I go to you, Erin, Michael, if you could just sort of give us a baseline definition of what we're talking about when we say distributed wind.
Absolutely. It's a very wide and broad category. So essentially, it's any wind turbine that's connected on the distribution grid. This is opposed to large transmission grid integrated projects, which we're familiar with. It's dozens of large units spinning in a field. These are smaller, but there's still a lot of range. So it can, on the small end, be a small 10, 15 kilowatt turbine that's serving a household or a farm. They're mid-sized turbines, which is 100 kilowatts up to just under a megawatt. We have co-ops that are experienced in that space. And then they're the large full-scale units, just like the ones you see in the big wind farms, but just 1, 2, 3 deployed in one location. So there's a lot of range. It can be something that's serving a household all the way up to something that's, on the distribution grid, but it can be in front of the meter as a generating resource. It can be behind the meter, say serving a commercial and industrial member, a farm, or even on a residential. Or it can be serving off-grid or isolated grid locations. For instance, wind turbines serving off-grid villages in Alaska, or maybe a small turbine that's serving a water pump or a telecoms tower, something where you don't need that grid connection or 24/7 power, but it can provide power when it's available.
That's perfect. So, Aaron, Iowa Lakes has a sort of a signature wind project that is fairly unique. It's fairly large. I think it's about 21 megawatts. And it's been around a long time, over 10 years at this point. And from what I understand, it was quite an accomplishment getting it done. And there are several kind of superlatives that are attached to this project. Tell us exactly what your project is, what it does, and sort of how it fits into this RADWIND model.
Well, back in the early 2000s, our board was, renewables were kind of all the rage, just kind of starting, I should say, but on a smaller scale. And they wanted to do something, can our membership do something? Can we afford to do this and get into the realm a little bit and put up some large scale wind? Because we are out here in the northwest Iowa, we don't have a lot of trees. We're pretty flat with prairie, so we've got good wind resources. They looked at it. At that time, it was not feasible. We, of course, could not access some monies that your investor owns or private utilities can do. And then around 2008, we found that we could access some 0% CREBS monies. So, and in looking at that, where could we site this? We are a distribution co-op. We're not a G&T. We have to purchase, all of our power through the G&T. At the same time, ethanol was taking off across the country, and of course in Iowa we have a lot of corn, and so ethanol plants were springing up on our system. So with already having that infrastructure in and large substations sited right next to these ethanol plants, can we take advantage of that and not have to have so much large collection station and another substation for this? So we looked at that, and that's when the light bulb came on that, hey, it's not going to cost as much. We can take advantage of this existing substation. We can bring this generation in on the distribution system, which is what we operate. So we made a separate collection system on 12.5, which is very different from most of your wind farms, large wind farms, where they're usually at that 34.5 or higher, and then they kick it up and send it out. So coming back to the substations with that, we sited at 2 of our local ethanol plants, one east of our headquarters, about 30 miles. The other one's about 10 to 12 miles west of our headquarters. And we broke ground, and it was kind of a quick, here we go, because everything's fallen in order. We got to get with the landowners to get easements as well to build on these properties. But once they found out that it was going to be Iowa Lakes owning and operating and maintaining these, they were all for it because they were members, member owners, and they got behind that in a hurry. 2 wind sites, 21 megawatts total, first in the nation as far as a co-op to own and operate that and construct that with a contractor. And then it, like I say, once we turned the blades, got her going in 2009, fed into the system, you cross your fingers, but it all worked. And of course that goes through the substation, through the meter for the G&T. The G&Ts pay us. But like we had kind of discussed earlier in the RADWIND project paper, the electrons are going to flow where the load is. So that is going to go to that load center right there of the ethanol plants, and what's not being used goes out on the 69 to the other membership, to the other subs through our G&Ts.
That's great. For our listeners, you mentioned CREBS, which are clean renewable energy bonds. Those are federal financing vehicles for renewable energy. And Aaron, I know Iowa is a big wind producing state. Is there something about the geography of your particular area that makes it advantageous to do wind?
Well, like I kind of always joke with people when they ask me that, we've got one fence between us and Canada, and it doesn't do a real good job of stopping the wind because it's one barbed wire strand. So, but no, jokes aside, not a lot of trees here, very rural ag. And then we got the Buffalo Ridge, which is kind of that geological formation that starts up in southwestern Minnesota and runs down into northwest Iowa. It's not a real telltale ridge, not like you'd be thinking about your Rocky Mountains or your Smoky Mountains, anything like that. But it's enough of a ridge to get a good gain on production. And with history of met towers that are around the system for many years, we could get some data pulled to see if it was the right place to site.
Okay, let's pause quickly here for a word from our sponsor. And when we come back, we'll talk more about how the RADWIND project is helping co-ops.
This episode of Along Those Lines comes from the beautifully redesigned RE magazine. For nearly 80 years, we've told the electric co-op story with award-winning editorial and top-quality design. That journey continues with a full relaunch based directly on reader feedback. With a new logo, a more open, modern design, and more concise, grazable articles, the new RE embodies the innovation and member focus that defines America's electric cooperatives. Visit cooperative.com/RE magazine to see limited content and subscribe.
I'm Ellen Brown from Mojave Electric Cooperative in Bullhead City, Arizona. You're listening to Along Those Lines.
Welcome back. Michael, I know you've gotten interest from co-ops not only about the work product of RADWIND, but actually joining the project and adding their expertise. Talk about some of the other participants you sort of put a spotlight on with the RADWIND project.
Yeah, absolutely. And thanks to Aaron. Iowa Lakes have been working with us from the beginning. This is an area that's a little bit more niche, say, than solar. But, like I said, we identified dozens of co-ops who've used this resource and have experience in this. So we've got a member advisory group that we call member stakeholder group. We've had about 10 different co-ops that have participated in that. We're looking to build it out further over time. That includes 2 G&Ts and the rest are distribution. Besides that, we've got 5 case studies. Some of those have been on the advisory group like Erin and Iowa Lakes, but others are different co-ops. So we've had touch points there. We've also had listening sessions with members where we have really our partners from Haas Consulting lead those calls and really just want a one-on-one kind of unvarnished conversation with staff at co-ops to talk through different issues. It's not for attribution, it's more for background, but really to kind of kick the tires on some ideas that, you can get into more detail than say when you've got a whole meeting of folks talking. So a lot of different touch points. We had a survey go out early this year. We followed up with folks that responded to that survey. So that's got about 60 folks, 60 co-ops in an initial interest group. So sending out information to those that were interested in follow-up. So looking to build it up over time. This is a 2-year project. So I think we've been happy with the engagement we've had. And as we've started to develop more resources, I think we'll attract more co-ops to look at this. And generally just, given the current national environment with a lot of interest in carbon reduction, renewables really kicked up, I think that's going to be something of a rising tide that raises all boats regardless of the technology or scale.
That's a great point. And you mentioned these unvarnished conversations and how you're sort of sharing best practices and pitfalls and things that have gone right, things that have gone wrong. Aaron, Iowa Lakes has been doing this a long time now. What kind of stuff have you been able to share with the RADWIND project and other co-ops about things to be aware of and things to do and not do?
Well, of course, you always got to have consideration. Like I said, the membership and the landowners before this took place, they were skeptical if it wasn't going to be owned or operated by Iowa Lakes. I think that's true with any project, whether it be wind, solar, or a transmission line or distribution line, whatever you're trying to do. You got to be upfront and be honest about what's going on. When we first did this project, we had the maintenance contracted out through a contractor. Nothing wrong with that. Good contractor, but they're not local. They're not living right here, and it's not as much ownership taken of that project. So we looked into bringing that in house, hiring on staff to do that as well. It's a large enough project, so we did. We got 3 guys on hand that is all they do. They are trained in wind turbine technology. Right from the college here at Iowa Lakes Community College in Estherville, which is one of the first also in the nation and one of the only that produces wind turbine technicians. So we put them on staff. Not only does that create jobs and some influx of money into the economy, but now we've got ownership in that project. These guys, their report card is that statement every month of what's is the availability there around 100% when the turbines, when the wind comes up, is it going to generate? What's the capacity factor? Well, how are we doing on maintenance? And these guys live that every day. So that has proven to be one of the strong points that we always tell people. If you can do it yourself, afford to have those people on staff, you'll do much better in the end on the bottom line.
And I'll just add to that. I think, from each of these case studies we've done and conversations, we're learning bringing maintenance in-house, I think, is a key lesson, especially for owned projects. Because in some cases, you can get in a long-term agreement for service and maintenance with the turbine manufacturer. And this is at a large scale, fairly large-scale project, but we're seeing on the smaller scales, this is even more of a challenge because smaller manufacturers that aren't GE have a smaller footprint. You have to get someone to come come out to do maintenance, it can take a while and a turbine could be offline. So having locally trained folks partnering with technical colleges, this I think is a big lesson learned going forward. And especially valuable for distributed scale projects where you don't have someone coming out to do dozens of turbines and doing it. So having in-house or at least local maintenance staff is a really important thing, I think, for especially co-op owned and operated projects like Iowa Lakes.
And that also, in our membership that may have some of those smaller turbines or older turbines, these guys can kind of help them. We don't go work on them, but they call us. What have you seen on this model and what's going on? And we've got some history with these guys that have been in the industry for 20 years or more that are on our staff, and they can help out our membership that way. And not only with the wind, but with solar too. If that's the DG of choice out there, they've got that knowledge.
Yeah, and I wanted to get into that because I know Iowa Lakes has a program where you will help your individual members build or install and interconnect these smaller wind turbines on their farms. Is that part of the RADWIND project? Are you feeding that information in? Give us a sense on how that works.
It may not be a direct tie-in, but everything kind of spins back to how do you do it and how does it connect? And yeah, when our folks are looking to site, what now is the big thing is solar because it doesn't have as many moving parts for the individual member to do. We look at what their load is, and when we talk to them, maybe the salesmen maybe aren't quite up front. They want to sell as much product as they can. We tell our members size it to your load because you're going to get paid off of offsetting your retail rate. We're only going to pay you for the wholesale. That's the whole nuts and bolts of it because of the PPA. That's the G&T's rate. If you can offset your retail rate and don't oversize, now you're making that more of a win-win for you. And, we still got to be there as the backup because, the sun isn't going to shine, the wind is going to blow all the time. So basically we're their battery, and they understand that to not oversize and spend more than they should and get the most out of their DG.
With RADWIND, those behind the meter type installations do fall under what we're looking at in this project. And we've talked to some others that, have a net metering program, say. But solar has grown much more quickly. And one area that I think we're trying to help DOE with is they've done a lot of work with smaller turbine manufacturers to, where they can, make smaller turbines, bring in some of the lessons learned from the larger ones. Now, you can't make them bigger, which is a lot of it, but fewer moving parts and high-tech materials to really make them, more cost competitive against solar. So there's interest in this across the way, but ultimately I'd say, what's been coming out of these listening sessions and what our partners have said, which really dovetails really well with NRECA, is they say, well, we would like co-ops to be able to say, we're the trusted advisor for whatever you're doing in energy, which is what we say, and they're looking at the distributed wind space, and that's what this project is. But what Aaron just said is really the ideal. When a member wants to do something, even if it's behind their meter, they come to the co-op first. And we're looking to provide resources that for the subset of those that are looking at distributed wind will help the co-ops be that advisor in this space, just like we did with Sunday and some of the other resources focused on other technologies.
Like I said, wind is kind of taking a pause on that small side behind the meter. But, in my mind, I think it may come back. And the reason is, as solar maybe progresses and matures, it takes more property to get that megawatt generation in place there with solar. Now, if you put a turbine up in a good functioning, well-run turbine, well-maintained turbine, a lot smaller footprint. And I think that if we can get back to that with less maintenance and new properties, like Michael had said, new makeup of it, I think we may see that come back around as well.
Yeah, that was going to be my next question because it seems like, as Michael was saying, this push for renewables is not going away. It's going to get bigger and bigger. And then you get into these enormous installations of solar. This seems like a sort of a no-brainer. And it sort of begs the question for me, the idea of a rooftop wind installation. If I get to the point where, okay, I want to try this on my roof, does that technology even exist? Have you seen that? Is that part of this project?
Yeah, that's the equivalent of this small scale wind that's, 5, 10, 15 kilowatts. It's equivalent to rooftop solar, but you don't put it on the roof. You still need a tower that goes up, which is why in a densely packed urban area, that can be a challenge. People don't want you putting up a large tower because it's still 100 feet in the air. In fact, I was just down in North Carolina in the Outer Banks, and there's a brewery there that has a 10 kilowatt unit that I could, actually sit underneath and see spinning. And that's the scale that you would have. It might not make as much sense, again, in a metropolitan area, but if you got more land, either the residence or at a farm, I think there's a lot of opportunity, and this is what DOE feels for that kind of deployment. Plus, the footprint is much smaller, and there's lots of opportunities, we think, for hybrid projects where you can have the complementary generation from the wind and the solar. Solar's during the day, kind of predictable that way. Wind can blow at night, unlike the sun. Wind tends to have more output in the winter when there's less solar. You compare a battery with that. So we think there are lots of opportunities, and that's it across the scale, from that residential scale all the way up to fairly large utility scale projects like Iowa Lakes.
Yeah. Michael, you talked a little bit about how there are some case studies up there now. Is there something you have in mind as the final work product of this? What all do you want to get out there? What are some of the results that you'd like to see from this in a year and a half when this project runs out?
Yeah, so like I said, the year one is really kind of getting our arms around what's already been done in this space, what are the gaps. So that's why, we have the survey report is online. All of our resources, if you go to cooperative.com/RADWIND, that will get you to our resources, our main landing page. So we have the survey report summarizing the results that we got from distribution surveys there, from distribution members. We have a use case report, which really kind of says, well, what are the different ways you can use wind as a distributed application? And that gets into the scale of the turbines, in front of the meter, behind the meter. You can put them into a microgrid. You can pair them with other technologies in a hybrid. We just posted a second report in that series. It's the value case. It's what values can you gain from using wind as a distributed resource? And that, on one level, it's just the levelized cost of energy. What are you going to get the kilowatt hours, the megawatt hours for? But there are also other values and reasons you would deploy a distributed project using wind. Later in this year, the next project we're going to be working on business case, which kind of integrates those two. We've got a finance document looking at what are the financing options available for distributed wind. So really this first year is kind of getting our arms around it. From all the things that we're experiencing this year, as well as the case studies and discussions with co-ops, we are going to be looking at what are the tools and resources needed. What gaps do we need to fill in the second year? And that's really, we go into a period of negotiation with DOE about the second year, and that's where we're going to kind of nail down, okay, what are we really looking to create in the second year based on the learnings in the first year?
And Aaron, Iowa Lakes, I think you would probably say that the project that you've built is a successful project and a really good model. Do you agree with that? And do you have in mind any other projects that are similar? Any other thing that you might want to kind of add to the system?
Oh yeah, I would agree that it's been a success. When you first start, we had no idea would we fail, would we make it, would we not? And failure was not an option. That's what we all knew. We could not fail at this. But we knew we had the wind resources. We knew we had people we could lean on. And then with the membership behind it and getting property rights to erect these on, that was the first major hurdle, like I had mentioned earlier. But if something raised its head, that we could make it work on something else, we definitely would. Right now, that market is pretty tight. When we got into it, we've got a very rich PPA because of when we did that early on. Now with a lot of wind that's been put in place, that is at least half or more than what we're getting now. So at this stage right now, it would be a no-go. But who's to say what's going to change politically or down the road as far as renewables? Hey, we got that in our back pocket. We got some runtime with it. We could go a lot quicker on a project on the next one.
That's great. Well, it's super fascinating, and I can't wait to see where this goes, because having seen the success of the Sunday Project, I can really see this making an impact not only within the program, but in a broader industry. So, Michael and Aaron, I want to thank you for being on the podcast and sharing your insights with us.
Thank you, Scott.
Thank you, Scott. And thank you, Erin, for participating as well. I always appreciate your input.
Thank you, Mike.
And thanks to you, our listeners, and to our sponsor, RE Magazine. For more on this and other podcasts, visit us at electric.coop. Until next time, for Along Those Lines, I'm Scott Hoffman.
I'm Josh Green from Crawford Electric Cooperative in Bourbon, Missouri. Thanks for listening to Along Those Lines. Subscribe and rate us on your favorite podcast app.